Hello, and welcome back to the History of the Mongols. I'm your host, Kyle. This episode marks the first of a three-part series exploring the Mongol invasions of Japan. It represents a temporary leap forward in our timeline, moving from the reign of Great Khan Mongke to that of his younger brother and successor, Kublai Khan. In this initial installment, we will focus on the origins of the first Mongol invasion in 1274, including the broader context, the assault on Tsushima Island, and the fighting in Hakata Bay. Our second episode will follow the remarkable story of Takezaki Suenaga, a samurai who fought in both invasions and later commissioned an extraordinary set of illustrated scrolls documenting his experiences. The final episode will examine the often overlooked consequences of these invasions for both Japan and the Mongol Empire, along with their lasting historical legacy. Together, these episodes aim to provide a comprehensive, balanced account of one of East Asia's most significant military confrontations. Japan first drew the attention of the Mongols due to Japanese pirate raids on the Korean peninsula. Known as Wako, these maritime raiders had plagued Korean coastal settlements for centuries. However, their activities intensified during the early 1220s, exploiting the instability caused by the Khitan and Mongol invasions of Korea, as we discussed in previous episodes. The island of Tsushima, located between Korea and Japan, served as a strategic base for these pirates, offering a convenient launching point for raids across the narrow straits. It is important to note that these attacks were not sanctioned by the Japanese court. Rather than state-led military actions, they were opportunistic acts of piracy carried out by independent groups. Although the frequency of these raids diminished after Korea's formal submission to Mongol rule in 1259, they had already made the Mongols aware of Japan's existence and geographic proximity. In 1260, King Wonjong ascended to the Korean throne. His reign coincided with the rise of Kublai Khan, the newly declared Great Khan of the Mongol Empire. For those unfamiliar with the broader political situation, Mongke Khan died in August 1259 while campaigning in China. In the aftermath, two of his younger brothers, Kublai and Arik Boki, each proclaimed themselves Great Khan, igniting what became known as the Toluid Civil War. Kublai, operating from his power base in China, eventually defeated Arik, who held support in Mongolia, by 1264. However, this victory came at a steep price. The unity of the Mongol Empire fractured irreparably. Across Western Asia, Mongol-ruled Khanates, once subordinate to the Great Khan, splintered into autonomous and often hostile factions. The most prominent of these conflicts was the war between Hulagu in Persia and Berke's Golden Horde in the western steppes. Though Kublai emerged as the dominant Mongol ruler, his authority beyond China's western frontiers was largely symbolic. The Khanates, while maintaining diplomatic and familial ties, operated as independent states from that point forward. As a result, Kublai was compelled to concentrate his ambitions on China and the surrounding regions, including Japan, setting the stage for the events we will explore in this series. Kublai Khan's foremost military and political objective was the conquest of the Song dynasty, which ruled over southern China. As one of the wealthiest and most populous regions in the world at the time, defeating the Song posed significant challenges. The Mongols could not rely solely on direct assaults across the well-defended Song frontier. Instead, they adopted more strategic, indirect approaches. In the 1250s, Kublai successfully conquered the Kingdom of Dali in present-day Yunnan province, securing a southwestern front against the Song. This victory not only opened a new axis of attack, but also helped isolate the Song economically and militarily. Kublai also saw Japan as a key element in this broader strategy. Japan maintained active trade relations with the Song, providing the southern Chinese state with valuable resources. By bringing Japan into the Mongol sphere of influence, or outright vassalizing them, Kublai hoped to sever these trade ties, thereby undermining the Song economy and weakening their ability to resist Mongol conquest. But Kublai's ambitions toward Japan were not solely driven by military and economic concerns. Like his brother Mongke, Kublai saw himself as carrying out the will of heaven the divine mandate that the entire world should ultimately fall under Mongol rule. Subjugating Japan was simply the next logical step in fulfilling that destiny. Kublai, however, had an additional motivation, unique among the Mongol Khans. Unlike his predecessors, whose power base remained rooted in the Mongolian steppe, Kublai had consolidated his authority within China itself. To legitimize his rule among his Chinese subjects, Kublai adopted Chinese imperial traditions and symbols. In 1271, he formally declared the establishment of the Yuan dynasty, positioning himself as the rightful heir to the great Chinese empires of the Han and Tang dynasties, and the successor to the Ailing Song. This connection to China's imperial legacy shaped Kublai's attitude toward Japan. During the Tang dynasty, Japan had maintained tributary, religious, and diplomatic ties with China. The Tang emperors regarded the Japanese court as nominal vassals within the Sino-centric world order. These ties eroded in the centuries following the Tang's decline, with only limited trade re-established during the Song period. For Kublai, incorporating Japan back into China's sphere of influence, restoring the vassalage relationship, was not only a strategic imperative, but also a symbolic one. It reinforced his claim as the legitimate Chinese emperor, restoring order to East Asia. With these political, economic, and ideological objectives in mind, Kublai dispatched his first set of envoys to Japan in 1266, travelling through Korea to deliver his message. Kublai's letter was addressed to the King of Japan, a title that reflects the diplomatic complexities of the era. Formally, Japan was ruled by an emperor, at that time Emperor Kameyama, the 90th sovereign of the imperial line. However, since the end of the Genpei War in 1185, real political power in Japan had resided not with the emperor, but with the military government known as the Kamakura Shogunate. Founded by the formidable warlord Minamoto no Yoritomo, the Kamakura Bakufu wielded effective control over Japan, with the emperor relegated to religious and ceremonial duties. After Yoritomo's death in 1199, his young son succeeded him as shogun, but as the boy was too young to rule independently, authority quickly passed to the family of Yoritomo's widow, the Hojo clan. The Hojo established a system of regency, known as the Shekin, wherein they controlled the shogunate from behind the scenes, effectively ruling Japan for over a century. Shoguns were appointed and dismissed as the Hojo saw fit, with the Shekin serving as the true seat of power. By 1268, a 17-year-old Hojo Tokimune had assumed the role of Shekin, making him the de facto ruler of Japan, despite the nominal authority of both the emperor and the shogun. Thus, when Kublai's envoys arrived, they encountered a fragmented political structure, a young, ambitious Shekin controlling the government from Kamakura, an emperor in Kyoto with no real power, and an island nation wholly unaccustomed to dealing with the formidable Mongol Empire that now dominated East Asia. Despite his initial failure to make contact, Kublai Khan remained undeterred in his efforts to establish relations with Japan. After his first envoys turned back in 1266, he dispatched another mission in 1268, this time aboard Korean vessels under strict orders not to return without delivering Kublai's letter. Compared to earlier, more aggressive Mongol correspondence, this message was restrained but still asserted Kublai's claim as master of the universe. It invited the Japanese to initiate contact with a subtle warning: nobody would wish to resort to arms. The Japanese, however, found themselves in an unfamiliar diplomatic situation. They possessed limited knowledge of the Mongols, most of it second-hand from merchants or Buddhist monks arriving from the Song dynasty, embroiled in a bitter war with the Mongols since 1234. Japan had not engaged in formal overseas diplomacy since the 9th century, and neither the imperial court nor the Kamakura shogunate, the Bakufu, had established protocols for handling such overtures. The chosen response under orders from the Shekin Hojo Tokimune was silence, to dismiss the envoys without offering an official reply. But ignoring the most powerful ruler on earth was no simple matter. Later that same year, Kublai Khan ordered Korea to construct 1,000 warships and conscript 10,000 men, preparations that could be directed against either the Song or Japan. In late 1268, a third Mongol embassy set sail but halted on Tsushima Island in early 1269, capturing 2 local fishermen. These men were taken all the way to Kublai's capital, Dadu, modern-day Beijing, where they witnessed the grandeur of the Yuan court. Treated as honoured guests, they dined with the Khan, who displayed his wealth and power before delivering a message. He sought only for his envoys to reach Japan and for his name to be remembered for eternity. The fishermen were returned to Japan later that year to convey Kublai's words and the scale of his might, but once again, the Bakufu ignored the message. Kublai still preferred a diplomatic resolution. His war with the Song dynasty continued, and in 1269, a rebellion erupted in Korea, fueled by the strain of Mongol demands for resources and manpower. As discussed in our previous episode, Korea had endured near constant Mongol assaults from 1231 to 1259, and its population was weary. The uprising was not fully suppressed until mid-1271, but by then, news of Mongol military preparations had reached Japan. Since 1268, Japan had slowly begun strengthening its coastal defences, but news of the Mongol threat's proximity caused alarm within the Bakufu. Despite pleas for assistance from Korean defectors opposed to Mongol rule, Japan offered no aid. Instead, more warriors were mobilised to defend Kyushu, the westernmost of Japan's major islands, and the most probable invasion point. In 1271, following Korea's pacification, Mongol envoys returned to Japan bearing a more direct message: submit or face invasion. The envoys returned to Korea without a reply by year's end. 2 more missions followed in 1272 and 1273, but each met the same fate: silence from the Japanese authorities. Though the envoys gathered intelligence on Japan's terrain, people and defences, their diplomatic efforts had clearly failed. By 1273, Kublai Khan had run out of patience. With the key Song stronghold of Xiangyang falling to Mongol forces that year, the collapse of the Song dynasty appeared imminent. Confident that his empire could now spare the resources, Kublai prepared to punish Japan, not only for its insolence, but to secure Mongol dominance across East Asia, once and for all. In 1274, final preparations for the Mongol invasion of Japan were completed. The fleet departed southern Korea that November. Though not an overwhelmingly large force by Mongol standards, it was formidable. Approximately 15,000 Mongol, Northern Chinese, Khitan, and Jurchen soldiers, supported by 6,000 to 8,000 Korean troops, and 7,000 Korean sailors aboard 800 to 900 ships. The overall command was entrusted to Prince Kindu with a coalition of Mongol, Chinese, and Korean generals and admirals. Lacking significant naval experience beyond riverine warfare in South China, the Mongols relied heavily on Korean maritime expertise to navigate the voyage. Once on land, the Mongols anticipated victory. After all, they had bested every opponent of the 13th century. Kublai Khan expected Japan, a small island chain on the edge of the known world, to fall swiftly, for eternal blue heaven demanded no less. On November 4th, 1274, the fleet was sighted off the coast of Tsushima Island. Tsushima was governed by the So clan, with So Sukekuni serving as deputy shugo, or military governor. According to the Japanese chronicle Hachiman Gudokun, Tsushima housed a significant shrine to Hachiman, the god of war. The day of the Mongols' approach, a fire broke out at the shrine, a dark omen. Yet after the flames were extinguished, a flock of white doves, messengers of Hachiman, gathered on the shrine's roof. Sukekuni took this as a divine warning. Later that day, confirmation arrived. A fleet was approaching. With little time to spare, Sukekuni mobilised his garrison, about 80 samurai and their retainers, and marched to the beach at Komoda to await the Mongols at dawn. As the Mongol fleet drew closer, Sukekuni dispatched a small boat to inquire about their intentions. The envoys were rebuffed, and the landing ships advanced. Sukekuni organised his men for battle. Though famed for their swordsmanship, 13th century samurai were, like the Mongols, primarily horse archers. Armed with their long, asymmetrical Yumi bows, their skill and accuracy with arrows made them formidable opponents. However, the samurai's emphasis on individual glory and heroism limited their ability to execute complex, coordinated tactics such as feigned retreats or massed hit-and-run attacks, key components of Mongol warfare. Under the command of General Hotun, the first troops to land were likely those considered expendable, non-Mongol conscripts, primarily poorly armoured Chinese. They bore the brunt of the Japanese arrow fire, using large wicker shields to provide cover as the Mongols disembarked and prepared their horses. Despite retreating into the tree line to leverage their close combat prowess, Sukekuni's forces were overwhelmed. One samurai, after cutting down several enemies and a Mongol officer, stood defiantly on the fallen man's body, shouting challenges to the Mongols. His bravado was met with a hail of arrows. One pierced his chest armour, killing him instantly. Sukekuni led a final, desperate charge before he and his men were cut down. From November 5th to November 13th, the Mongols overran Tsushima, destroying towns, farmland, and crushing any remaining resistance. The women of the So family committed suicide rather than face capture. The Mongol fleet then sailed toward Iki Island, heralded by a gruesome spectacle. Both Japanese and Yuan dynasty sources attest to the sight. Prisoners, primarily women, had wire threaded through their palms and were strung across the prows of the Mongol ships, a grotesque and terrifying warning to those who lay ahead. The island of Iki fell to the invaders within a day. Several smaller islands and the Matsura Peninsula offered only token resistance as the Mongol fleet advanced toward the northwestern corner of Kyushu and Hakata Bay, the island's largest natural harbour. Hakata Bay was a logical target. Its broad, sheltered beaches made it an ideal landing point for a large invading army. Hojo Tokimune, the military ruler of Japan, recognised this and concentrated his defensive efforts there. The Japanese force consisted primarily of warriors from Kyushu, but in anticipation of the invasion, reinforcements had been drawn from western Honshu as early as 1274. Exact troop numbers are debated, but it is clear the Japanese were outnumbered. Modern estimates suggest between 4,000 and 6,000 defenders faced over 20,000 troops from the Yuan fleet, though the Yuan Shi, the official Mongol chronicle, claims an improbable 102,000 Japanese were present. On November 19th, 1274, the Mongol-led army landed on the sandy beaches of Hakata Bay. Chinese and Korean infantry disembarked first, protected by large shields and armed with long spears. They were followed by Mongols, Turks, Khitans, and Jurchens, who led their horses ashore and quickly mounted. According to Japanese tradition, battles began with an exchange of arrows, specifically arrows with holes drilled through the heads to create a whistling sound as they flew. The Mongols, familiar with such signals for battlefield communication, reportedly laughed at the display. The sound of Mongol drums and gongs soon filled the air, signalling orders across their ranks. The unfamiliar noise startled the Japanese horses, disrupting the samurai's attempts to challenge the invaders in ritual single combat. Japanese warriors who rode forward seeking personal glory were met with disciplined volleys of arrows and cut down when they tried to penetrate the enemy lines. Japanese sources later accused the Mongols of using poisoned arrows, claiming they caused sickness among the wounded. More terrifying still were the bombs, paper or iron shells filled with Chinese gunpowder, lobbed into the Japanese lines. The explosions, with their flash, smoke and deafening noise, disoriented and frightened the defenders. Unlike the more individualistic style of samurai warfare, the Mongol army advanced and retreated in coordinated formations, an unnerving sight for Japanese warriors accustomed to more fragmented combat. Over the course of the day, the Japanese were driven from the beaches, and their defensive line was breached. fires consumed the nearby town of Hakata, spreading rapidly. Another group of Japanese attempted to establish a defensive position at Akasaka, but were repulsed. Yet once the initial shock of the Mongol assault wore off, Japanese resistance stiffened. The samurai were highly skilled archers, trained from youth in the use of the yumi, Japan's powerful longbow. Their accuracy and strength surprised even the Mongols. Small Mongol units that became isolated from the main force were ambushed and picked off. In one notable incident, a leading Yuan commander, Liu Fuxiang, was struck in the face by a Japanese arrow and had his horse stolen. Gravely injured, Liu was evacuated to the ships. Japanese resistance had proven more formidable than the Mongols expected. Overconfidence, compounded by divisions among the Yuan leadership and language barriers, hampered the invaders. Faced with growing casualties and uncertain about advancing further inland into unfamiliar territory without reinforcements, the Mongol commanders decided by nightfall to withdraw their forces. The Yuan fleet retreated to their ships and set sail for Korea, bringing the first Mongol invasion of Japan to an end and giving rise to one of the most famous legends in Japanese history. Interestingly, few contemporary Japanese sources attribute the Mongol withdrawal to divine intervention. At most, they note that strong winds hindered the Yuan fleet's return journey. One of the principal Japanese accounts, the Hachiman Gudokun, simply records that the defenders were surprised to find the fleet gone the next morning, with only a single ship run aground on the shore. It is the Mongol sources that dramatise events. The Yuan Shi, compiled in the 1370s from earlier Mongol records, portrays the campaign as a resounding success, the Japanese supposedly crushed, and claims the army only withdrew after exhausting their supply of arrows. According to this version, a ferocious storm struck the retreating fleet, scattering ships and drowning thousands of soldiers. The Mongols had good reason to frame the campaign this way. Blaming the retreat on a freak weather event was far more palatable than admitting they had underestimated Japanese resistance. The reality appears more complex. Modern historians emphasize that the Yuan fleet had already begun withdrawing before the storm struck. They say, the Japanese were in little need of divine intervention. The myth of the kamikaze, or divine wind that saved Japan, only gained prominence in later centuries as part of the broader national memory of resisting foreign invasion. Neither side, however, considered the conflict resolved. The Japanese fully expected a renewed Mongol assault and began fortifying their defences. Construction commenced on an extensive defensive wall along the coastline of Hakata Bay, stretching for dozens of kilometres, while the Bakufu refined systems to rapidly mobilise samurai warriors. Kublai Khan, for his part, viewed the 1274 invasion as a limited expedition, merely a taste of what the Yuan Empire could unleash. In 1275, he sent another diplomatic mission to Japan, demanding submission. The Japanese response was unequivocal. The envoys were executed, eliminating any remaining hope for diplomacy. Once Kublai completed the conquest of the Song dynasty in 1279, securing control over all of China, he turned his full attention to Japan. Preparations began for a vast, unprecedented military campaign, an invasion designed to subdue Japan entirely and fulfill Kublai's vision of bringing the archipelago under Mongol rule, once and for all. The story of the Second Mongol invasion is one for another time. In our next episode, we will focus on the remarkable figure of Takezaki Suenaga, a historical samurai who played a role in both invasions and later commissioned a detailed set of illustrated scrolls recounting his experiences. Through Suenaga's story, we will explore not only his personal journey, but also examine Japan's broader defensive strategies, military organisation, and battlefield tactics. His account offers a rare window into how the samurai responded to the unprecedented threat of the Mongol invasions. Following that, we will release another episode that analyses the long-term consequences of these invasions for both Japan and the Mongol Empire. We will examine how these failed campaigns reshaped Japanese military doctrine, influenced the development of samurai culture, and affected the political trajectory of the Mongol Empire itself. Together, these upcoming episodes will provide a comprehensive look at one of the most significant military encounters of the 13th century and its enduring legacy in East Asian history. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the history of the Mongols. If you're enjoying the series and want to help support it, you could like the video, make sure you are subscribed to the YouTube channel, and leave a comment to let me know where in the world you are listening from. Thank you, and see you all next time.